Running on Empty 2, Echoes of the Earth. Chapter 1, The Weight of Freedom. Danny Pope stepped off the crowded bus into the thick, humid air of New York City. The sounds of the streets seemed louder than usual. His senses heightened as if the city itself was pressing in on him. The last time he had been here, everything felt different. Back then, his life had been a whirlwind of secret identities and fleeting goodbyes. Now, it was a strange combination of freedom and emptiness. He was free to attend Juilliard, free to live with his grandparents, but the weight of that freedom sat heavily on his chest. His parents were gone, on the run again, this time without him. For the first time in his life, Danny wasn't looking over his shoulder, wasn't waiting for the next escape route. But the silence of their absence was louder than he had ever imagined. The family had always been his anchor, even as they dragged him from one alias to another. Now he was left to face the world alone. At least, that's how it had felt until Lorna stepped back into his life. Her love had given him a reason to stay, to fight for something other than the life his parents had chosen. He could still see her, her wide eyes staring up at him in the rehearsal room at Juilliard, their fingers brushing across the piano keys as they played a soft duet that held more meaning than either of them had said aloud. But now things were different. It wasn't just about music anymore. Their love had grown deeper, rooted in something more powerful than notes on a page. "Hey!" A familiar voice called out from behind him. Danny turned to see Lorna walking toward him, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her hair was wild from the wind, her eyes glowing with that same passion he had always loved in her. She looked different now, older, wiser. New York had changed her too. She wasn't the shy daughter of his music teacher anymore. She was something stronger. "How was class?" Lorna asked, reaching for his hand as they walked towards Central Park. Danny shrugged. "It's good, but I don't know. Sometimes it feels like I'm playing someone else's music." She gave him a knowing smile. "You always say that, but we both know you make it your own." He nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. Something was pulling at him, something he couldn't shake. They continued walking in silence until they reached their usual spot, a secluded corner of the park where the trees offered a rare sense of privacy. "I've been thinking," Danny finally said, turning to face her, "about what you said last week, about activism." Lorna's eyes lit up, but she didn't say anything, waiting for him to continue. "Maybe we should do more," he said, his voice growing more animated. "We've been talking about veganism, about changing things, but we're not doing enough. We need to take real action." Lorna nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing." They had both become vegans shortly after moving to the city, the cruelty of factory farming weighing heavily on their minds. It had been Lorna who first suggested they do something more, something bigger. But the idea had scared Danny. He was still Danny Pope, the boy on the run, the boy who had learned to hide rather than stand out. But something had shifted in him. Perhaps it was the freedom he now had, or perhaps it was the pain of seeing so many living beings suffer for the sake of profit. "I found out about this place," Lorna said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "An animal testing facility. It's not far from here." Danny's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean, they're torturing animals, Danny. Experimenting on them for no reason other than profit. We can't just sit by and do nothing." Danny's mind raced. The thought of animals suffering, trapped, helpless, was too much to bear. He had grown up in a world where survival meant running, where the innocent were punished while the guilty thrived. And now he was faced with a choice. Continue running or fight back. "We have to see it for ourselves," Danny said finally. "We can't do anything until we know what's really happening." Lorna nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "Let's do it." Chapter 2. The Unseen Horror. That night, they sneaked out of the dormitory, their hearts pounding as they made their way through the dimly lit streets of New York. The facility was hidden in plain sight, just outside the city. A cold, sterile building that gave no hint of the horrors inside. But they knew. They had heard the rumors, seen the reports, and now they were about to witness it for themselves. The wind whipped through Danny's hair as they crouched behind a fence, their breath visible in the cool night air. "Are you ready for this?" Lorna whispered. Danny nodded, though he wasn't sure if he really was. His stomach churned as they climbed the fence, slipping into the shadows. The facility was quiet, too quiet, and the silence only made the fear worse. They found a window at the back of the building, cracked just enough for them to peer inside. What they saw made Danny's blood run cold. Rows of cages, filled with animals. Rabbits, dogs, cats, all of them trembling in fear, their eyes wide with terror. Some of them were already hurt, their bodies covered in bandages, their fur matted with blood. Others were crying out, their voices hoarse from screaming. "Oh my God!" Lorna whispered, her hand covering her mouth. Danny felt like he was going to be sick. The sight of the animals, their suffering so raw and real, was too much. He wanted to smash the window to free them all right then and there, but he knew it wasn't that simple. They needed a plan. "We have to tell people about this," Danny said, his voice shaking with anger. "We have to make sure everyone knows what's happening here." Chapter 3: The Fire of Blame. Danny and Lorna's campaign started slowly, quietly at first, handing out pamphlets on the streets, talking to anyone who would listen. But as the weeks went on, their voices grew louder. More people joined their cause, and soon they were holding concerts, using their music to spread the message of cruelty and injustice. But with attention came danger. One night, as they stood outside the facility handing out flyers, they heard a commotion from inside. The air suddenly smelled of smoke, and flames shot up from the building. "Danny, look!" Lorna screamed, pointing at the fire. Panic set in as people rushed away from the scene. Fire trucks arrived, and soon the building was engulfed in flames. News reports would later say that an explosion had occurred, caused by the gas lines inside the facility. Several workers were killed, and the facility was destroyed. The next morning, Danny and Lorna woke to find their faces plastered across the front page of every newspaper. Eco-terrorists responsible for deadly explosion. Their hearts sank. They had done nothing wrong, but the media had already painted them as villains. They were being blamed for a crime they didn't commit. Chapter 4: On the Run Again. Danny's old instincts kicked in immediately. Run. Hide. Don't let them catch you. But this time it wasn't just him. It was Lorna, too. And he couldn't bear the thought of her being dragged into the life he had spent years trying to escape. "We have to go," Danny said, his voice cold and distant. "We can't stay here." Lorna looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes. "But we didn't do anything. We have to prove that." "And we will," Danny said, pulling her into his arms. "But we can't do it if we're behind bars. We have to find my parents. They'll know what to do." Chapter 5: Across the Miles. They were back on the road, this time heading for California. Danny knew his parents were somewhere along the coast, but finding them wouldn't be easy. He had been out of contact with them for so long, and now they were as much fugitives as he was. They left New York with little more than the clothes on their backs, avoiding cities, avoiding people. Every newspaper headline, every news broadcast felt like a ticking time bomb. They had to clear their names, but first they had to survive. The journey was long, exhausting, and filled with moments of doubt. They traveled through back roads, sleeping in rundown motels, hitchhiking when they could. But as the weeks went by, the strain of being on the run began to take its toll. Lorna grew quieter, more withdrawn. The girl who had once been so full of life was now weighed down by fear and uncertainty. "Are we ever going to find them?" Lorna asked one night, her voice barely above a whisper as they sat by the fire on a deserted beach. Danny stared at the flames, the flickering light reflecting in his eyes. "We will. We have to." Chapter 6: Signs from the Past. The sound of the ocean crashing against the shore was the only noise that filled the heavy silence between them. Danny's mind was swirling with memories of his parents, the way they always seemed one step ahead, and of his childhood spent hiding in plain sight. But this time was different. He had something to fight for, something that wasn't just survival. It was justice for the animals, for the truth, for his life with Lorna. As the flames crackled in front of him, he reached into his bag and pulled out a worn photograph. It was a picture of his family, taken years ago, when they were living in some nameless town under an alias he could barely remember. His father's face, weathered and serious, stared back at him. His mother's kind eyes, always full of sadness, watched over them. And there he was, young, unaware of the sacrifices they had made for him. "We're not like them," Danny said quietly, almost to himself. Lorna looked over, her eyes questioning. "What do you mean?" "We're not like my parents," Danny said, his voice full of conviction. "They ran their whole lives. But we can't. We have to stand up and fight back." Lorna nodded, though her face was still etched with worry. "But we don't even know where they are, Danny. How do we find them?" "We'll find them," Danny said, his voice steadier now. "My father used to leave signs, clues, so I'd know where they'd been. It's how they've stayed ahead all these years." Lorna leaned closer, curious. "What kind of clues?" Danny smiled faintly. "Little things, like a phrase in a newspaper ad, or a mark on a tree. They're subtle, but I know how to read them." That night, they packed up their camp and moved farther inland, following Danny's instincts. As they walked, he scanned the landscape for signs, anything that might point them in the right direction. They traveled for days, moving through small coastal towns, tracing faint memories of his father's tricks. One day, in a small, weather-beaten town near Big Sur, Danny saw it. A scratch on the side of a wooden post, barely noticeable, but unmistakable to him. It was a mark his father used, a symbol that meant safe. "They were here," Danny said, his heart racing. "Not long ago." Chapter 7, The Family Reunites. The trail led them to a secluded cabin, nestled deep within the coastal forest. It was the kind of place his parents always found, a place no one would think to look. The cabin looked abandoned, but Danny knew better. His parents had always been careful, always kept a low profile. He and Lorna crept up to the cabin, the tension between them growing with every step. What would his parents say? Would they be angry, or would they be proud that he had come this far on his own? Danny knocked softly on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. Standing there was Annie Pope, her face lined with age and worry, but her eyes bright with recognition. "Danny!" Danny stepped forward, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom!" They embraced, and for the first time in years, Danny felt the weight of his past lift, if only for a moment. "Come in, both of you," Annie said, ushering them inside. Lorna followed quietly, her eyes wide as she took in the surroundings. The cabin was sparse, but warm. It felt like a safe haven, a place where they could finally stop running, at least for a little while. Arthur Pope appeared from a back room, his expression serious as always. "Danny," he said gruffly, pulling his son into a quick embrace. "I was wondering when you'd find us." Danny could feel the tension in his father's words, the unspoken question hanging in the air. "Why are you here?" "I didn't have a choice," Danny said, his voice steady. "They're after us." Arthur's brow furrowed. "Who?" "The FBI, the meat industry, the press, everyone." Danny hesitated, then added, "They think we blew up an animal testing facility." Annie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "But you didn't." "No, we didn't," Lorna interjected, stepping forward. "We were trying to expose them, not destroy anything. But someone set it on fire, and now they're blaming us." Arthur paced the room, his mind clearly racing. "This is bad, Danny. Real bad." "I know," Danny said, his voice growing more urgent. "But I have proof. It wasn't us. It was someone working for the meat industry trying to discredit us. We can clear our names, but we need your help." Arthur stopped pacing and turned to face his son, his eyes filled with a strange mix of pride and fear. "I always knew you'd get involved in something big. You've got your mother's fire." Annie stepped forward, placing a hand on Danny's arm. "We'll help you, sweetheart. But it's going to be dangerous." Danny nodded. "I know, but we have to do this. We can't keep running." Chapter 8. The Evidence Unfolds. The next few days were a whirlwind of planning and strategy. The Pope family had always been good at staying one step ahead, But now they had to do more than just survive, they had to fight back. Danny and Lorna shared everything they had learned. The names of the corrupt officials, the documents they had collected, the hidden cameras they had placed in the testing facility. It was a mountain of evidence, but they knew it wasn't enough. They needed a lawyer, someone who could present the case without being intimidated by the powers they were up against. That's when Arthur mentioned an old contact, a lawyer named Diego, who had once helped him during one of their many escapes. He was an activist, much like them, but with a mind for the law. "We'll need to go south," Arthur said. "He's in Mexico now, working on environmental cases." Danny and Lorna exchanged a glance. They had already traveled so far, and now they would have to go even farther. But they were willing. They had no other choice. Chapter 9. Southbound. Their journey to Mexico was fraught with challenges. They had to keep a low profile, avoiding checkpoints, traveling through the rough terrain of the desert. But with each step, Danny felt more certain that they were doing the right thing. Lorna's resolve had strengthened as well, her fear turning into determination. The sun was setting when they finally reached Diego's small office, hidden away in a bustling town near the border. He was a man of few words, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. As soon as he heard their story, he agreed to help. "We'll need to gather more evidence," Diego said, tapping his fingers on the desk. "But this case is winnable. If we can expose what they've done, it could change everything." For the next several months, they worked tirelessly. Diego helped them compile the evidence, and they traveled across Mexico and Central America, exposing corrupt farming practices and gathering support from local communities. Each place they visited was a new challenge, with mercenaries and corrupt officials trying to stop them at every turn. But with Diego's help, they managed to stay one step ahead. They hired guards, formed alliances with activists, and slowly built a case that could clear their names and bring justice to the animals they had fought so hard to protect. Chapter 10. The Sound of Peace Before the Storm. The journey had been long, and with every day that passed, Danny, Lorna, and Diego felt the weight of the world pressing down on them. They had uncovered more corruption than they had expected. Animal testing, illegal land grabs, pollution that poisoned rivers and sickened villages. It was as if every step forward revealed a new layer of decay, and the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. But tonight was different. After months of constant running and uncertainty, they had found themselves in a small, remote village nestled in the heart of the mountains in southern Mexico. The air here was clean, and the people were welcoming, their lives intertwined with the rhythms of nature. They were people of the earth, living off the land and tending to it with care. For the first time in what felt like years, Danny and Lorna felt a sense of peace. The village elders had invited them to stay the night, offering them food and shelter in exchange for sharing their stories of activism. They spoke of Danny's battle against the meat industry, of the suffering of animals, and of the urgent need to protect the land and the people who lived on it. The villagers listened closely, their eyes filled with wisdom and quiet strength. Many of them were descendants of ancient native tribes, and their connection to the earth ran deep. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the village, the elders prepared a fire in the center of the square. It was a simple gathering, but it felt sacred. Danny, Lorna, and Diego sat around the fire with the villagers, the smell of burning wood and fresh herbs filling the air. The stars began to appear overhead, brighter and clearer than they had ever seen before. One of the elders, a woman named Xochitl, began to speak in a low, melodic voice, telling the story of her people. She spoke of the Earth Mother, the creator of all life, and how she had gifted the land to the tribes who honored her. She spoke of the animals, who were seen not as resources, but as sacred beings, each with a spirit and a purpose. The Earth Mother, she said, had given humans the responsibility to protect the animals, to care for the land, and to ensure that balance was never lost. "We are all connected," Xochitl said, her eyes glowing in the firelight. "What we do to the land, we do to ourselves. What we take from the earth, we must give back." Danny listened, his heart swelling with emotion. It was the same philosophy he had always believed in, the same truth he had been fighting for all along. He felt a deep connection to these people, to this place. Here, away from the chaos of the outside world. He could feel the pulse of the earth beneath him, grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in years. Lorna reached for her flute, the instrument she had carried with her through every hardship. She had played it in moments of quiet, when the world felt too heavy, and now she wanted to offer something to the village in return for their kindness. She began to play, the soft, lilting notes of the flute filling the night air. It was a simple melody at first, but it carried with it a deep sense of peace. The villagers listened in silence, their eyes closed, swaying gently to the music. Lorna's playing seemed to echo the land itself, the wind in the trees, the flow of the rivers. Diego, who had been sitting quietly, picked up a drum from the pile of instruments near the fire. He began to tap out a steady rhythm, low and resonant, his hands moving in sync with the beat of the earth. It was a tribal rhythm, one that seemed to connect them all to something ancient, something primal. Danny, feeling the energy build around him, stood up. He hadn't sung in a long time, but tonight, the words came to him easily. He let the rhythm of the drum and the melody of Lorna's flute guide him as he began to sing. A song of freedom, of hope, and of the earth. Song: The Earth's Lament. Verse 1. We walked in shadows, far from the light. Lost in the darkness, we forgot the fight. But here by the fire, with stars in our eyes, we remember the land, the spirit that never dies. Chorus: O Mother Earth, hear our song. We've been away, we've been gone too long. But now we return, with hands to heal, to mend what was broken, to make it real. Verse 2. The rivers they cry, the forests they weep, for the promises made that we didn't keep. But together we stand, with hearts open wide, we'll restore the balance, with love as our guide. Chorus: O Mother Earth, hear our song. We've been away, we've been gone too long. But now we return, with hands to heal, to mend what was broken, to make it real. Bridge: through the fire and the flood, we'll find our way. With the animals and trees, we'll fight every day. For the earth is our home, our breath, our soul, and we won't stop fighting until we make it whole. Chorus: O Mother Earth, hear our song. We've been away, we've been gone too long. But now we return, with hands to heal, to mend what was broken, to make it real. The song ended, and the silence that followed was filled with something more powerful than words. The villagers nodded in quiet approval, their faces illuminated by the fire. There was a peace here, a sense of unity that Danny had longed for but had never quite found, until now. As the fire crackled, Diego turned to Danny, his voice soft but filled with meaning. This is what we're fighting for, he said. This connection, this peace. The world has forgotten it, but we haven't. Lorna smiled, her eyes shining with tears. We're doing the right thing, Danny. No matter how hard it gets, we have to keep going. Danny reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. We'll make it through this. Together. Chapter 11. The Calm Before the Storm. For a moment, they allowed themselves to rest. They stayed in the village for several days, connecting with the people, learning from their ways, and sharing stories of their journey. The villagers taught them how to live off the land, how to honor the animals without exploiting them, and how to listen to the earth's voice. It was a peaceful time, a brief respite before the storm they knew was coming. The evidence they had gathered was enough to bring down powerful people. Corrupt officials, corporate giants, and dangerous mercenaries who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. But here, in the heart of the mountains, surrounded by people who understood the sacredness of life, Danny and Lorna found the strength to continue. They were not alone in this fight. They were part of something bigger, something that had been going on for centuries. The fight to protect the earth, to restore balance, and to bring peace to a world torn apart by greed and cruelty. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for now, they had each other. They had the music, the land, and the fire in their hearts. And that was enough. Chapter 12. The Return. Their peace was shattered the moment they returned to the city. News had spread. Danny and Lorna's faces were plastered across every major network. The charges of eco-terrorism had escalated, and now there were bounties on their heads. They had become symbols of resistance, and with that came both support and danger. Diego had secured a lawyer in the U.S., someone willing to take on their case, but getting back would not be easy. The forces against them were stronger than ever, and their enemies would stop at nothing to silence them. But Danny and Lorna were ready. They had found their strength in the mountains, in the music, in each other. They were no longer running, they were fighting back. Chapter 13, Into the Fight. The village had given them clarity, but now, back in the city, the full weight of the battle loomed. With each step through the crowded streets, the sounds of distant sirens and the hum of everyday life carried an edge of urgency. Their faces, once anonymous, were now public. Wanted posters tacked on every street corner, their images playing on the news in hotel lobbies. They had become more than just people. They were symbols. Danny glanced at Lorna, her hand gripping his tightly. The peace they had found in the mountains felt like a distant memory, but its strength stayed with them. It would have to. They had to go underground again, relying on Danny's old instincts, just like his parents had taught him. But this time it was different. He wasn't hiding. He was planning. Diego's lawyer is ready, Lorna whispered as they turned down an alley, their shadows stretching out before them under the city lights. But we'll need to meet him in D.C. if we can make it that far. Danny nodded, determination burning in his chest. We will. We'll figure it out. They had a network now, a loose connection of activists, environmentalists, and vegan groups who had rallied behind their cause. Their message had spread, and while the world labeled them eco-terrorists, others saw them as heroes. The truth, as always, was somewhere in the middle, but the truth didn't matter anymore. Not in this fight. Chapter 14, The Reprieve. Their contact in the city, a quiet man named Marcos, led them to a hidden safe house on the outskirts of town. It was small, tucked away behind rows of abandoned buildings. Inside, the atmosphere felt tense. Everyone knew the risks, but there was something else in the air. Anticipation, as if the storm was about to break. Here, Marco said, handing Danny a folder stuffed with documents. These are the final pieces of evidence you need to clear your name. We got it from someone inside. It wasn't easy. Danny opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents quickly. They were filled with emails, memos, and photographs, proof that the animal testing facility had been set up, that someone within the industry had orchestrated the fire to frame them. It was everything they needed. Lorna, standing beside him, let out a sigh of relief. This is it, she whispered. We can prove we didn't do it. But Danny's face remained grim. This won't stop them from coming after us. Even if we prove we're innocent, they'll find something else. That's why we need to go to court, Diego said, stepping into the room. He had been waiting for them, his expression as calm and steady as ever. We need to fight this the right way, legally. It's the only way to win. Legally, Danny repeated, his voice heavy with doubt. That's how they control everything. Not always, Diego countered. Not if we use their own system against them. You've done the hard part. You've exposed the truth. Now it's time to let the world see it. Chapter 15, Music Before the Storm. The next day, the air in the safe house was heavy with preparation. They had secured transportation, but the journey to Washington, D.C. would be long and dangerous. The idea of getting caught weighed heavily on all of them, but they also knew that this was their moment. Everything they had fought for had led to this. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden light through the cracks in the windows, Lorna picked up her flute. The tension in the room was palpable, and she could feel it. Without saying a word, she brought the flute to her lips and began to play. The first notes were soft, tentative, but as she played, the melody grew, filling the small space with a sense of calm. It was a song she had written during their time in the village, a song that echoed the peace they had found there, the simplicity of the earth, the rhythm of life, and the hope they carried with them. Danny, sitting across from her, closed his eyes. The music washed over him, and for a moment, all the fear, the uncertainty, the exhaustion, they faded away. He remembered the firelight, the village elders' stories, the sound of the wind in the trees. He remembered what they were fighting for. Diego, sitting quietly in the corner, began to tap out a rhythm on his drum. It was slow at first, a heartbeat beneath Lorna's flute, but it grew stronger with each beat, grounding the music in something deeper, something primal. Danny couldn't resist. He began to sing softly, his voice raw but filled with emotion. The words came to him easily, almost as if they had been waiting, just beneath the surface. Song. The Traveler's Heart. Verse 1. We've walked this road 1,000 miles, through fire and storm, through pain and trials. But here we stand, with hands held high, under the same eternal sky. Chorus. Oh, we are travelers bound by the land, with the wind at our backs and the earth in our hands. Through the mountains and the seas, we'll find our way, for the heart of the traveler never goes astray. Verse 2. The trees, they whisper secrets low, of times long past, of things we know. But here tonight we find our peace. In the music, the earth, a sweet release. Chorus. Oh, we are travelers bound by the land, with the wind at our backs and the earth in our hands. Through the mountains and the seas, we'll find our way, for the heart of the traveler never goes astray. Bridge. Through the darkness and the light we'll carry on, for the road is long, but the journey's song will guide us through, with love as our flame, and we'll never, no never, be the same. Chorus. Oh, we are travelers bound by the land, with the wind at our backs and the earth in our hands. Through the mountains and the seas, we'll find our way, for the heart of the traveler never goes astray. The music faded into the night, leaving behind a deep stillness. It was a moment of connection, of peace, before everything was set into motion. They knew what lay ahead. The road to DC would be fraught with danger, but they had each other. They had their song, their rhythm, and the earth beneath their feet. This is how we win, Danny whispered, his voice barely audible. We keep going. Lorna nodded, her eyes filled with determination. We keep going. Chapter 16. The Road to DC. The next morning they set out. They moved cautiously, slipping through the city's outskirts, staying away from the main roads. Their destination was clear, the heart of Washington, where they would present their case and expose the truth to the world. As they traveled, Danny couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Every shadow, every sound seemed to carry a threat, a reminder of the forces that were against them. But they pressed on, Diego's steady presence keeping them grounded. The closer they got to DC, the more the tension grew. They were nearing the final confrontation, the moment where everything would either fall apart or come together. But Danny felt ready. For the first time in years, he felt like he was no longer running from his past. He was running toward something. The city loomed ahead, the Capitol building in the distance, a symbol of both power and corruption. This was where they would make their stand. Chapter 17. Into the Lion's Den. As the sun began to rise over the Washington skyline, the weight of the journey settled heavily on Danny's shoulders. The tension in the car was thick, and despite the miles they had covered, the danger felt closer than ever. Every street seemed like a trap, every alley a potential ambush. Diego drove, his jaw set in determination, while Lorna stared out the window, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the fogged glass. The city, with all its noise and motion, seemed so far removed from the peace they had found in the mountains. But here they were, back in the heart of everything they had been fighting against. This is it, Danny whispered, looking up at the Capitol dome in the distance. This is where we make our stand. They had coordinated with Diego's lawyer, a man named James Cortez, who was sympathetic to their cause and willing to represent them in the upcoming trial. But the closer they got to the courthouse, the more Danny's mind buzzed with doubts. What if they didn't make it? What if the evidence wasn't enough? What if the corruption ran too deep for the truth to matter? But Lorna, sensing his unease, reached for his hand. We're here for a reason, Danny. We've done everything we could. We've come too far to stop now. Her words grounded him, just as they always had. He squeezed her hand and nodded, forcing himself to focus on the task ahead. Diego parked the car a few blocks from the courthouse, in a discreet lot where they wouldn't attract attention. They had decided to move cautiously, avoiding the media frenzy that would be waiting for them. But they couldn't hide forever. Eventually, they would have to face the cameras, the reporters, the barrage of questions. But for now, they had to get to Cortez and prepare for the trial. As they stepped out of the car, Danny took a deep breath, the crisp morning air filling his lungs. He looked around, half expecting to see mercenaries lurking in the shadows, but for the moment, all was still. "We move fast," Diego said, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "Stick to the plan. We meet Cortez in his office, go over the strategy, and then we head to court." Danny nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead, imagining every possible outcome. The trial was set to be public, with reporters from every major network covering the event. This wasn't just about clearing their names, it was about exposing the truth behind the animal testing facility, the corruption within the meat industry, and the lies that had been spun to discredit them. But with that exposure came risk. Powerful people had a lot to lose, and Danny knew they would stop at nothing to silence him and Lorna. They had already tried once, and they would try again. Chapter 18, The Trial Begins. The courthouse was buzzing with activity. As they walked in, heads turned, whispers followed them, and cameras flashed in the distance. The weight of the moment pressed down on Danny, but he forced himself to keep moving. This was it, the moment everything had been leading up to. James Cortez was waiting for them in a small office near the courtroom. He was a tall man with sharp features and a calm demeanor, his suit pressed and professional. He greeted them with a firm handshake, his eyes glinting with determination. "We've got a solid case," Cortez said as they sat down. "The evidence you've collected is damning. They'll try to discredit you, but with what we've got, they'll have a hard time making it stick." Danny nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. But as Cortez began to go over the details of the case, the magnitude of what they were up against sank in. The trial would be long, grueling, and the opposition would be ruthless. They had to be prepared for anything. As the clock ticked down to the start of the trial, Danny's nerves flared. He had always been able to remain calm under pressure, but this was different. His whole life had been leading up to this moment, and the stakes had never been higher. Finally, it was time. They walked into the courtroom together. Danny, Lorna, Diego, and Cortez, each step echoing in the grand, imposing chamber. The judge was already seated, his expression unreadable as he looked down at them from the bench. The jury was in place, their eyes fixed on Danny and Lorna, the weight of their scrutiny palpable. Across the room, the opposition lawyers sat, smug and confident, their clients, the CEOs of the meat industry and the corrupt officials they had exposed, looking unfazed by the proceedings. But Danny knew better. They were afraid. They wouldn't have gone to such lengths to frame him and Lorna if they weren't afraid of what they could reveal. The trial began with opening statements, each side laying out their case. Cortez spoke with conviction, detailing the corruption they had uncovered, the evidence they had gathered, and the lengths the opposition had gone to in order to discredit them. He painted Danny and Lorna not as eco-terrorists, but as activists fighting for the truth, for justice, for the earth. But the opposition was slick. They painted Danny and Lorna as radicals, accusing them of inciting violence, of being reckless and irresponsible. They brought up the fire at the animal testing facility, the explosion that had killed innocent people. They claimed it was all because of the pamphlets Danny and Lorna had distributed. Lorna's hand tightened around Danny's under the table. The lies were coming fast and heavy, but they had the truth on their side. Chapter 19. A Song of Protest. During a recess, after hours of grueling testimony, Danny felt the weight of everything bearing down on him. The trial was taking its toll, and despite Cortez's confidence, the opposition's lies were hitting hard. The media was having a field day with it, and Danny's face was splashed across every screen, labeled as a criminal, a danger to society. He needed to clear his head. That evening, back in the safe house, Lorna pulled out her flute again. She could see the stress in Danny's eyes, the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of everything. She knew what he needed. "Play with me," she said softly, handing him a guitar they had picked up along the way. "Let's forget everything for a moment. Let's go back to the music. Diego smiled from his seat in the corner. He grabbed his drum and began to tap out a slow, steady beat. It was a rhythm that mirrored the heartbeat of the earth, a grounding force that brought them all back to what mattered most. Danny hesitated at first, but as Lorna began to play the flute, the melody soft and haunting, he couldn't resist. His fingers found the strings of the guitar, and he began to strum, the music filling the room, soothing his frayed nerves. The words came to him naturally, a song of protest, a song of hope. Song, Rise Up, verse 1. They say we're reckless, they say we're wrong, but we've been fighting this fight too long. We've seen the damage, we've felt the pain, but we'll keep rising up again. Chorus, oh rise up, don't turn away. We're the voices of the earth, and we're here to stay. We'll stand our ground, we'll make our stand, for the future of this land. Verse 2. They call us radicals, they call us fools, but we won't be bound by their broken rules. We've seen the lies, we've felt the fear, but we'll keep rising year after year. Chorus, oh rise up, don't turn away. We're the voices of the earth, and we're here to stay. We'll stand our ground, we'll make our stand, for the future of this land. Bridge, through the fire and the storm we'll carry on, for the earth is our home, where we belong. With every song, with every cry, we'll rise up, and we'll never die. Chorus, oh rise up, don't turn away. We're the voices of the earth, and we're here to stay. We'll stand our ground, we'll make our stand, for the future of this land. As the final notes of the song faded, Danny felt something shift inside him. It was as if the music had awakened something deep within, something stronger than fear, stronger than doubt. They were in the fight of their lives, but they weren't alone. They had each other, they had the truth, and they had the power of their voices. The world might try to silence them, but they would rise up. No matter what happened next, they would rise. Chapter 20. The Verdict. The next morning, the courthouse was packed. Reporters swarmed the building, their cameras and microphones aimed at the doors. Inside, the tension was palpable as everyone waited for the jury's decision. Danny and Lorna sat side by side, their hands clasped tightly together. Diego stood behind them, a silent but steady presence. They had done everything they could. Now it was out of their hands. The jury filed in, their expressions unreadable. The room fell silent as the foreman stood, holding the small piece of paper that would determine their fate. We, the jury, find the defendants. Chapter 20. The verdict continued. The silence in the courtroom stretched for what felt like an eternity. Danny's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing the anxiety coursing through his veins. He squeezed Lorna's hand, bracing himself for whatever came next. The foreman's voice, low and deliberate, filled the room. Not guilty. The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before sinking in. Danny blinked, hardly daring to believe it. The tension in his body, the fear, the uncertainty. All of it crashed down around him, replaced by an overwhelming wave of relief. Lorna gasped beside him, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Diego closed his eyes, letting out a deep, grateful sigh. They had won. The room erupted in a mixture of gasps and murmurs, but Danny didn't hear any of it. All he could focus on was the immense weight that had been lifted from his shoulders. They were free. Their names were cleared. Judge Winters banged his gavel to restore order, but it took a few moments for the chaos to settle. Court is adjourned, he announced, his voice final and clear. The trial was over. Danny turned to Lorna, his eyes wide with disbelief. We did it. She smiled, her eyes filled with tears of joy. We did. They stood, and Diego wrapped them both in a hug. It's over, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're free. But even in the midst of their relief, Danny knew that their journey wasn't truly over. The trial may have ended, but their fight for justice, for the earth, for the animals, for the people who couldn't fight for themselves was just beginning. Chapter 21. Aftermath. Outside the courthouse, the streets were swarmed with reporters, cameras flashing as soon as Danny, Lorna, and Diego stepped out. The verdict had sent shockwaves through the media. They had been branded as eco-terrorists, but now they were being hailed as heroes by the same networks that had condemned them. Cortez, their lawyer, led the way, expertly navigating the chaos. He spoke to the reporters, his voice steady and confident, ensuring that the message of their victory was clear. The truth had won out. But Danny and Lorna remained silent, overwhelmed by the attention. This was never about fame for them. It had always been about the message. The work they had done in South America, the changes they had made to farming practices, the lives they had touched, that was what mattered. As they made their way through the crowd, they were approached by a young girl, no more than 15, holding a handmade sign that read, "Thank you for saving our Earth." Danny's heart swelled. This was what they were fighting for, the next generation, the future. He crouched down to speak to her, his voice gentle. "Thank you for believing in us." The girl smiled shyly. "You gave me hope. I want to help too." Lorna knelt beside him, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You can. We all can." Chapter 22. A New Beginning. With the trial behind them, Danny and Lorna were free to move forward, and their first step was to continue their work. They had spent 2 years traveling through South America, transforming farms, educating communities, and creating sustainable change. Now they would take that mission global. Their music, which had once been a private outlet for their emotions, became a powerful tool in their activism. They played concerts at environmental rallies, their songs echoing the message of change. Each performance was a call to action, a reminder that the earth needed their voices. Diego stayed with them, becoming not only their friend but their partner in the movement. Together, they built a network of activists, musicians, and environmentalists, each contributing their unique skills to the cause. Their travels took them across the globe, from the forests of the Amazon to the deserts of Africa, from the polluted cities of Asia to the remote villages of the Arctic. Everywhere they went, they saw the impact of human neglect, but they also saw hope. They worked with indigenous communities, learning from their ancient knowledge of the land, and in return, they shared their modern strategies for sustainability. In the mountains of Peru, they met with tribal elders who taught them about the power of music and storytelling to heal the earth. In the jungles of the Congo, they worked with local farmers to implement regenerative agriculture practices that restored the soil and provided food for their communities. Their journey wasn't without challenges. There were moments of exhaustion, of doubt, of fear. The corporations they had once stood against still sought to silence them, sending threats and hiring mercenaries to disrupt their work. But no matter how many times they were knocked down, they got back up. They had learned to fight together. Chapter 23. The Song of the Earth. Years passed and their movement grew. They had become symbols of hope, of resistance, of change. But through it all, their music remained at the heart of their journey. It was their way of connecting to the earth, to each other, and to the people they met along the way. One night, after a long day of traveling, they found themselves on a remote beach in Costa Rica. The sun had set, casting the sky in deep purples and blues, and the sound of the ocean waves filled the air. Lorna pulled out her flute, and Diego began tapping a rhythm on his drum. Danny, feeling the familiar pull of the music, picked up his guitar. They sat around the fire, the flames dancing in the cool night air, and let the music flow. The song that emerged was different from any they had played before. It was soft, intimate, and filled with the wisdom of all they had learned. It was the Earth Song, a tribute to the journey they had taken, to the people they had met, and to the future they were building. Song. The Song of the Earth. Verse 1. The earth sings softly, in whispers and winds, of mountains and rivers, of where life begins. We've walked through the valleys, we've climbed to the sky, and we've heard the song of the earth as we rise. Chorus. Oh, the song of the earth, it calls us home, to the forests, the seas, the places we've roamed. In the breath of the wind, in the heart of the flame, we're bound to the earth, forever the same. Verse 2. The trees, they have spoken, in voices so old, of stories untold, of treasures and gold. We've danced with the rain, we've sung with the sea, and we've felt the earth song in you and in me. Chorus. Oh, the song of the earth, it calls us home, to the forests, the seas, the places we've roamed. In the breath of the wind, in the heart of the flame, we're bound to the earth, forever the same. Bridge, through the pain, through the strife, we've found our way, in the arms of the earth, where we'll always stay. With every breath, with every cry, we'll rise with the earth, we'll never say goodbye. Chorus. Oh, the song of the earth, it calls us home, to the forests, the seas, the places we've roamed. In the breath of the wind, in the heart of the flame, we're bound to the earth, forever the same. As the last notes of the song faded into the night, Danny looked around at his friends, his family. They had been through so much, but they had found their way. They had found peace not just with the earth, but with themselves. Lorna smiled at him, her eyes shining with love and pride. "We did it," she whispered. Danny nodded, his heart full. "Yeah, we did." And as they sat there, under the stars, listening to the gentle song of the earth, they knew that their journey was far from over. There was still so much to do, so much to fight for, but they would do it together. For the earth, for the future, for the song that would never end. Epilogue, A New Dawn. Years later, Danny and Lorna's story became legend. They continued their work, traveling the world, spreading their message of peace, sustainability, and love for the earth. They built schools, helped communities, and left behind a legacy of hope. And through it all, the music never stopped. Their songs, filled with the passion of their journey, became anthems for a new generation of activists, inspiring countless others to rise up and fight for the earth. In the end, it wasn't about fame or fortune. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about the connection they had found to each other, to the earth, and to the deeper truth that bound all living things. The song of the earth played on, and they would forever be a part of it. The end.